Sup, fam? I'm Leon, the Paperback Maniac, coming at you with another vintage horror book review. Straight from quarantine, in my PJs. Today, we are taking a look at Erebus by Shaun Hutson. This book was published by Star in 1984. I'll begin by reading the synopsis from the back cover. The people of Wakely are pale and gaunt. They have abnormally long fingernails and prominent teeth, and some of them have hair on the palms of their hands. Their animals are ugly and vicious. Their offspring are born mutant. Mares eat their newborn foals. Bullocks rampage in the slaughterhouse and kill their would-be butchers. What is poisoning the lifeblood of Wakely Town? What evil force has it in its thrall? Read Erebus and never eat red meat again. As you might infer from this amazing cover art here, this is basically a take on the vampire novel. Now, this is not your average vampire novel. These are not like your suave, sexy Jerry Dandridge style vampires, nor are they your kind of moody, saturnine Brad Pitt type vampires, and they certainly aren't your sparkly emo vampires. No. These are Shaun Hutson style vampires, and of course, being a 1980s UK paperback horror novel, it's also founded 100% on scientific facts, right? This is not supernatural in any way. And it's also a virus novel while we're at it, so that's a little apropos for the current time, right? Yeah, so this novel opens early in the morning with a very wealthy man heading to a farm that he owns in the English countryside in a rural town called Wakely. He's heading to a farm to check on this newborn foal, this foal or baby horse that was born a couple of days ago is due to be worth millions one day because it was sired by a prize-winning stud horse. So this wealthy guy is going to check on it in the early morning. And when they get to the stables, they see the foal. It looks pretty strong and healthy, and it's nuzzling up against its mother, which is cute. The mother is this giant mare, and all of a sudden, the mother, this horse, starts shaking its head violently in agitation, and it starts sweating. And then kind of its ears prick up, its nostrils flare wide open, and its eyes start to roll back in their sockets. And then this giant mare just kind of totally loses it and viciously attacks a worker in the stable with her hoof, kind of sending this guy reeling backward to land on the ground with a quote unquote sickening thud. This is one of Shaun Hutson's pet phrases, which basically just denotes that the man is splintered, his ribs and things. And then the mare turns its attention onto the little foal and its own baby, and the little foal starts to kind of back up a little nervously, and then this mare lunges at the foal and clamps its jaws over the baby's skin, tearing out a chunk of flesh and muscle, just causing blood to explode every which way, as if from a high-pressure hose, it's described, spraying all of the horrified onlookers. And I do have a little quote, of course, that I have to read from this scene. Viewer discretion is advised. There is some pretty gnarly graphic imagery concerning animals here. Laura Bristow, this is the wife, screamed as the crimson fluid splattered across her face and body, turning her white mink the color of poppies. Bristow himself could only watch, mesmerized, as the mare reared high in the air before bringing both front hooves crashing down onto the smaller animal's back, smashing its spine. The foal crumpled beneath the onslaught, its legs collapsing under it. The little animal raised its head as if soliciting help, but a pile-driver blow from the mare caught it above the right eye. The sharp edge of the hoof shaved away a portion of the skull and tore the glistening orb from the socket. Still attached by the optic nerve, it dangled like some bloodied table tennis ball from the gaping hole in its head. Yeah, pretty freaking gnarly, right? So the wife just kind of collapses from this. The man who owns the stable sort of doubles over and starts puking his guts out. And, everyone is just mortified. Like, what could have caused this animal to act so savagely and brutally, right? So then the day progresses in this town of Wakely, and we meet a young guy named Nick who is preparing for his first day at the local abattoir. And, he's a little nervous, right? To be having his first day in the killing room, or the quote-unquote carcass cave, as the local slaughterhouse workers refer to it. And there's an older guy named Ken, who is in charge of, the killing, and he's the one who's going to be showing Nick the ropes here. And, he leads Nick into the slaughterhouse, and they they put on these heavy waders first, and they go on this catwalk, and they're kind of walking and looking down at all the animals, all the cattle in their pens. And then they descend onto the killing room floor, and they're wading through just this chunky, just bloody gore that's just all over the floor of the slaughterhouse. It's absolutely disgusting. Ken goes, he picks up what he calls the Humane Killer, which is this large air pistol. He goes up to a cow, puts the bolt to its forehead, and pulls the trigger. And, of course, the cow collapses dead as its sphincter muscles go out, splattering excrement all over the gory floor, just described in very close detail. And, another worker comes in and says that they're going to have 80 pigs delivered today that need to be taken care of. And, this older guy, Ken, notices the young trainee, Nick, looking a little, green around the gills. And he says, are you all right? And, Nick nods, even though his stomach is, quote-unquote, somersaulting. That's pet phrase number 2 for Mr. Hutson. And then they approach another pen, and they look, and there's a cow in there. But this cow looks a little different. This cow looks like it's very, very scared. It's trembling. It has fear in its eyes. And suddenly, this cow and some of the other cows in the pens start ramming against the gates of their pens, trying to get out. Now, Ken, shouts at Nick to, go and grab the other air pistol so they can take care of it. And one of the cows gets loose. He rams out of the pen, and he goes for Ken. But Ken dodges out of the way. But this young trainee, Nick, isn't so lucky. The cow basically gorges him through his stomach wall, and, quote, the stench of the bullock mingled with the powerful odor of his own viscera, and the crushing impact first mangled the lower part of his ribcage to a pulp, rupturing both lungs, then tore open his belly, releasing a tangle of intestines. And so this young guy Nick is just screaming, and his screams are reverberating over the walls of the pen here. And then the other cows break free, and the older guy Ken makes a run for it, but he's not fast enough. And I have a little quote here to describe what happens to this trainer Ken. The bullock slammed into him, shattering his pelvis, destroying kidneys and liver in the fearful impact. He felt as if his internal organs were being forced upwards, first into his chest and then into his throat. What was, in fact, filling his throat was a mixture of blood and bile, which, seconds later, gushed from his mouth like water from a broken dam. As the animal backed off, the slaughterer slumped to his knees and found himself gazing into the burning eyes. The beast fixed him in an insane stare, eyeballs bulging madly in red-rimmed sockets, thick streamers of saliva hanging from its mouth. The bullock drew back a foot or so, then butted him again, pushing him down into the ocean of blood, pressing hard on his chest until the sternum collapsed and his body seemed to fold in upon itself. I could keep going. Like, it just goes on and on. But so both these guys just get brutally mutilated. Then the cow collapses near him and gets basically taken out by gunshots from like some of the other workers that go there. All right, then we meet our protagonist of the novel, a guy named Vic Tyler, who has recently returned to his hometown of Wakeley from London to inherit the family farm that he grew up in. And when he first goes to the farm, he checks on the pigsty, and he is amazed to see how large these pigs are, much larger than they should be. And he mentions this to one of the farmhands, who tells him that this is true for actually all of the animals on the farm, because they have all recently been feeding on a new multi-purpose feed from a large chemical company in town called Vanderbilt Chemicals. He says that, Vic's father, before he died, had purchased a lot of this multi-purpose feed, and it's meant to like increase growth in livestock, and he's been using it, and a lot of other farmers in town have been using this feed as well. You can kind of see where this is going, right? We then meet an American reporter named Joanna, or Joe Ward, who writes for the Arkham Comet, which is the newspaper for the adjacent town next to Wakeley. And she gets a call from a guy named Jeffrey Anderson, who works for this chemical company, chemical plant, Vanderburg Chemicals. And he sounds panicked, and he tells her that he has some information he needs to give her, and he would like to meet with her, right? So they schedule to meet in this remote place at 11:30 p.m. that night. Unfortunately, this chemical worker never makes it to the meeting because that night, when he's actually going to the apartment, a figure materializes in the backseat of his car. It's like this downpour, of course. It's pouring rain, and this person in the backseat suddenly loops a wire around Jeffrey Anderson's neck, cutting the wire through his flesh and windpipe. And this guy, his eyes roll back in his skull as the pressure increases. And I've got a quote here. Finally, quote, "The sound of fluid excretion signaled his death, but Anderson's executioner pulled the wire tight against the dead man's spinal cord. Only the bone prevented Anderson from being decapitated." And then, of course, the car starts to stink like a slaughterhouse, which is as it's described. So suffice it to say, Jeffrey Anderson does not make his appointment with the American reporter, possibly to divulge some shady shit that's going on with the chemical company, right? And it's not only weird stuff happening with animals. Humans, too, in Wakeley seem to be undergoing changes. A shop owner who lives in the community notices the extreme pallor of his skin when he looks in the mirror, and notices like these great coils of skin like sloughing off of him, right? And then when he goes to take a piss, he notices thick gouts of blood coming out of his pee. And quote, "It was as if his bladder were filled with red ink." And, he realizes that it's not that his urine is blood-colored, but that he is actually, like, legitimately pissing blood, right? So it kind of makes you question, what the hell is happening in Wakeley? So That's kind of what this reporter Joanna Ward wants to know, right? So the next day, she decides that she's going to go to Vanderburg Chemicals. Since this guy that called her frantically saying he wanted to talk to her, never showed up to the meeting, she wants to go and look into this. So she kind of sneaks her way inside the chemical plant, making up some BS, to the security guard. And once she's there, she talks to sort of the head guy who immediately is addressing her tits rather than her face, which kind of happens in every interaction that this woman has with a male, it seems like. And she asks about this guy. She says, I was supposed to meet with one of your workers, Jeffrey Anderson, but he never showed up. And then this guy says, well, you're mistaken, because Jeffrey Anderson no longer works for this company. He hasn't worked here for weeks. And she's like, well, he called me from work last night, and clearly that's not true. But this guy's like, no, you must be mistaken. Yeah, that guy, we don't know anything about that guy. He's been gone for a while. So something is definitely up here, right? So meanwhile, Vic Tyler, the farmer, is noticing weird things going on with the cattle in his farm. They appear to be super sick. One cow starts bleeding, then its rump explodes in a shower of blood and excrement, and a mutant calf peeks out from its bum, destroying the body of its mother in the process as it slides out of its mother's carcass. And I've got another quote here to describe this hideous birth. Let's see, page. Okay. So, Tyler and Howley recoiled, splattered with blood, watching as the calf, which they could now see was huge, struggled to free itself from the torn body of its mother. Pieces of cow and calf became momentarily as one, and it was as if the men were witnessing some monstrous kind of binary fission, as one animal became two. Like the nuclei of two cells, the animals separated, the cow going into spasm as the calf continued to tear itself free. It burst from the torn remnants of its mother, lumps of the alanta corium hanging from it, the membranous sac sticking to it like grotesque streamers of translucent flesh. Yeah, so this hideous abomination starts shambling toward the men then. And, Tyler has no choice but to pick up his pitchfork and start just brutally, jabbing it in this mutant animal's chest. Stabbing it multiple times, also, through the eyeball, until finally it dies. And then, the men stand around in this blood-soaked room, looking at this deformed calf, dead calf, and, what's left of its mutilated mother. And, it's obviously some sort of mutation, but what could have caused this, right? The vet who's there with Tyler says he'll do an autopsy, try to get to the bottom of this. And, then as we go, we notice that it's not just farm animals who are suffering from some sort of strange affliction. The townspeople of Wakely start to become super pale. Their skin is cream white. Also their fingernails start to grow long and pointed. It's very, very disconcerting. Now, eventually, this American reporter, Joanne, basically teams up with the farmer, Vic Tyler, and they decide to kind of join forces to try to get to the bottom of this, to find out what's going on, with the livestock, what's going on with the people, what's causing these mutations and this strange, violent, erratic behavior. And they go, early on, once they get together, they go to a livestock market, a place for vendors and buyers of animals to kind of get together in the town. And they go to an enclosure that contains some of Vic Tyler's sows and 6 little piglets. And again, these piglets are much larger than they should be. And, the piglets, when they get to the enclosure, they're all kind of vying for their mother's teats. It's very adorable. But then they soon start to get a little restless, a little agitated. And one of these sows gets the mother's teat in its mouth and wrenches it free. And then, this sets the other little piglets off, and soon they're all like gnawing and tearing at the teats, causing blood to just jet every which way in the enclosure. And before you know it, they're all pigging out, literally, on their mother's mutilated stomach cavity. And Tyler, grabs one of the piglets, pulls it off, and then the thing comes at him, trying to bite at him. And he kicks it square in the face. And then a workman runs into the enclosure with a sledgehammer, starts just dispatching these piglets one by one, just bashing them, trying to put them down, while the mother, the mutilated starts dragging herself away, quote, her intestines dragging in the straw like bulging, bloodied party streamers. So, yeah, it is clear that something is way the fuck off in the town of Wakeley, and reporter Joanna Ward wants to get to the bottom of this. She suspects Jeffrey Anderson had something to do with it, and he wanted to tell her something. And this chemical plant that he worked at is trying to suppress the knowledge and hide something. And, so she's working with this farmer, Vic Tyler, to try to figure it out. And they are going to have their work cut out for them because, as I mentioned, it's not just the farm animals who are undergoing changes. Humans, not only are they pale, then they start to grow hair in unnatural places, like the palms of their hands. They start to act uncharacteristically violent and inhuman, and they start to have a craving for raw flesh. We get an old lady bashing her cat's skull in with a walking stick and then eating its brains. We get a young boy who buries a trowel in his baby sister in a truly disturbing scene, one of the most fucked up scenes of infanticide I have ever read, and so on. And basically you get the gist. That is the plot of this. Things just go totally crazy in Wakeley as this thing starts to spread. And that's Shaun Hutson for you. If any of you guys are unaware, Shaun Hutson is a true OG. Now, actually, if you go back to the history of this channel, I reviewed one other Shaun Hutson book. It was actually, I think, the very first book I ever reviewed on the channel, Chainsaw Terror, which he wrote under a pen name, Nick Blake. Shaun Hutson has long been a favorite of mine. He has been writing ever since the early 80s. He says ever since apparently reading Guy Smith's novel, The Night of the Crabs, and thinking it was so awful that if that guy could get published, then he could. That's like his story. And, he's written, classic novels of this era like Slugs and Spawn. And this one, actually, I would put this in sort of that peak Shaun Hutson sort of era. He's, in addition to horror, he's written like some super violent, bloody war novels. He's written some like horror hybrid novels. And he was one of the few writers to kind of survive the commercial sort of collapse of the horror market in the early 90s by pivoting to like dark and gritty crime thrillers like in the mid 90s, but of course like still retaining his characteristic like just no holds barred violence, gore, and mayhem. He's been called the Godfather of gore, and also the Shakespeare of gore, although I don't know if I'd say Shakespeare. But, he's also been often compared to Richard Lehman, and I myself have made that comparison in the past. I can definitely see how he's sort of like the British equivalent, because both Shaun Hutson and Richard Lehman sort of, weren't afraid to tackle a verboten subject matter, and both of them just, showed such glee in their in their lack of restraint when it came to just like over the top mayhem in their books. Essentially, both of them were writing like the literary equivalent of like tasteless 80s splatter movies. But when it comes to gore, really, there is no contention. Shaun Hutson, no one comes close to this guy when it comes to just like gore in, literary horror. He is the undisputed master. When you read his books, you really get the sense that this guy is having a lot of fun writing these scenes. I mean, it's just like hyper exaggerated, almost to the point of, satire, right? Like, I love the way this guy describes gunshots, right? Like gunshot wounds, like gunshots like explode people's chests, making like, pieces of lung and like scapulas like ejecting like from the backside. It's just the way it's described is so like you can feel the glee, right? Like coming off the pages, right? Like you can tell like he's really having a fun time here. And, for a certain kind of reader, for a person like me who loves that stuff, you really just can't get enough of it. It's a blast. Having said all that about Hutson, there are people who really hate his guts. He does seem to sort of go out of his way to either offend or, make people angry. I mean, he is kind of like the original edgelord. This guy, like I said before, he credits Guy and Smith for getting him into writing, but not like how most people will say they started writing because they read a book and were like inspired by that book and like they wanted to continue on in that tradition. No, Guy and Smith, I mean, he like just like tears, or Shaun Hutson tears Guy and Smith apart, just saying that when he read The Night of the Crabs when he was like 14, he thought it was just like the biggest piece of garbage ever. And that's what like spurred him on to like start writing, because he like knew that he could do it better than that. But he also like says things like that he like never reads or that he doesn't care to read. And I can see how that can like annoy people. But, I don't take that stuff, seriously, like really the things he's saying. I think he says things to get a rise out of people, and it's partly that which I kind of respond to. I mean, it's that sort of like punk rock F you attitude that really don't see a lot of, certainly not these days. And not PC in any way whatsoever. And I kind of respect that, honestly. So this book, like every Hutson book that I have read to date, has gnarly fucking deaths, as you could tell from those passages that I read. And they're all just like so graphically rendered. No death is described without the body's accompanying bladder being released and bowels loosened. I mean, he never like lets that detail slip, right? It's just... Yeah, he just really has fun with those death scenes. For this book, I thought the setting was cool. I really liked this kind of rural English countryside setting, like with the hills and the glens and like the mist around. I think it's a nice change from the usual. It's a setting that I don't really read enough of in fiction. The English countryside is just gorgeous. Actually, when I read some of the description, it reminded me of... a town called Ilkley, where I briefly stayed when I was an undergraduate. I did a study abroad at the University of York in Yorkshire, and I did a study abroad, I did a homestay for like a week prior to the start of the semester with a family in this town called Ilkley, and it was beautiful. It had these like rolling hills, and reading this kind of reminded me of that English countryside. So obviously this being a Shaun Hutson novel, characterization is going to be negligible to non-existent. Our sole female character here, the American reporter, Joanna Ward, is basically seen as a sex object by nearly every male in the book, none of whom fail to ogle her breasts or her legs when they're talking to her. It's kind of hilarious. The writing in this book isn't like terrible, actually. In some instances, it can actually be quite visual. No one's ever going to claim that Shaun Hutson is a wordsmith, but, he does a fairly good job. Sometimes, some of the descriptions are interesting. Although I do have to say, he does have this irritating habit of putting commas after the conjunction, not before, when he's starting new clauses. But, that's something only like an English teacher probably would notice. Having said all that, though, he does, more often than not, have some pretty cringe-inducing passages, such as the following, which I will read to you. And... which, as a writing teacher, I just cannot condone, really. But here's the kind of thing sometimes he lapses into. Jo found herself gazing deep into the blue pools that were Tyler's eyes. Like twin circlets of June's sky, they seemed to glow with a radiance which she found both sensitive and arousing. As she ate, she looked closely at him, the chiseled features, the broad shoulders, and she felt a stirring within her. She was drawn not just to his physical appearance, but also by his easy manner. Christ, she was hot for him. It was as simple as that. I'll read the next passage. Tyler himself found his gaze drawn to her. She looked like something from an erotic dream, sitting opposite him with one tanned shoulder bare, the hair cascading over it, the tips of her nipples nudging the material of the dress. When she moved her foot, she felt one of her legs brush against his, and a feeling much akin to an electric shock ran up his spine. He watched her eating, fascinated and attracted by the way she licked her pouting lips after each mouthful. He saw the pink tip of her tongue flick forward, snake-like, before disappearing back inside that moist orifice. And I gotta say, that is just a precursor to a much raunchier sex scene toward the end of the book, which literally lasts for pages and pages. Of course, okay, one other thing that, should be noted here, another point of comparison actually between Shaun Hutson and Richard Lehman is that they are both incredibly right-wing, and it often comes across pretty prominently in their novels. Like in this one, for instance, we get Shaun Hutson's take on minority groups and the underprivileged, who apparently are all muggers and degenerates and leeches, right? But there's also some outdated racism here from a character. I don't think it's from Hudson necessarily, but one of his characters. And reading that in 2020 definitely makes you think, ooh, that didn't age well. But I've said this before. I am one to always try to divorce a writer's sort of politics or personal beliefs from the work. I think you can't appreciate the work on its own terms. I don't think there's any reason to stop reading H.P. Lovecraft just because he was a racist, xenophobic asshole. I don't think, just because I don't agree with Richard Lehman's or Shaun Hutson's politics, it doesn't mean I can't enjoy their fiction. So, but, it should be noted that, those things do exist in there, and it may annoy certain readers who are more sensitive to that stuff. But, overall, this is a Shaun Hutson book. It is what it is. You get what you would expect if you know the man. I, for my part, had a lot of fun with this one. It's just over the top. It's ridiculous. It pretty much gives you everything that this cover would promise. You get that. Like, this is the perfect cover for this book. It sells it fairly straightforwardly and well. So if you like that kind of thing, check out this book. Check out Shaun Hutson's other books. Pretty consistent. He's a pretty consistent writer. He's always entertaining. And if you like that kind of stuff, definitely check it out, yo. So yeah, okay, that's gonna do it, guys. That's the review for now. Stay safe, everyone. Hope you all are managing this crazy time okay. And be responsible and be safe and be well. And hopefully I'll see you guys soon with another video. Until then, take care. Peace out.